Frontier have finally admitted Odyssey's biggest problem, and this is the first time in years they've gone back to one of Elite's weakest systems before building on top of it with new content. Now, if you put all of this together, the upcoming ground combat overhaul, new Caspian Explorer, and the mystery in HIP 87621, it actually tells us quite a lot about where Elite Dangerous is heading. So here's the good news: if they get this right, it changes how Elite feels and how it actually plays in 2026 and beyond. But if they don't, well, I guess it's just going to be another missed opportunity. But that said, I have got pretty high hopes for this one. So in this video, I want to talk about why these changes were necessary, what they tell us about Frontier's priorities, and what it might mean for the future of the game. Now, earlier this week, Frontier announced a set of changes aimed squarely at Elite Dangerous Odyssey's ground combat. And this one is very specifically about the on-foot side of the game, getting out in your suit, fighting around bases and installations, and all of those things. Now, they're changing things like AI behavior, time to kill, weapon draw, and stow times, as well as projectile speeds and how lasers and kinetic weapons interact with shields and armor. On the surface, that can sound like a list of balanced tweaks, the sort of things that kind of can be considered minor changes. But ultimately, I think there's much more going on here. These changes have the potential to completely change how Odyssey-focused content actually plays, how it flows. And the timing of this really kind of matters as well, because when you take a step back, you can realize that all of this is happening before the next big update. That's called Operations, and that goes live early next year, in early 2026. So Operations, these are all about structured missions that link everything together, starting in space combat in your ship, and then taking you down onto a planet or the interior of a megaship and continuing the mission on foot. But listen, this is where things actually start to get very interesting, and it's a point that could be quite easy to miss. The fact that they're making these changes before megaship interiors and operations arrive tells us that they know they just can't keep bolting on new content onto the broken Odyssey foundation. And if we look at what Frontier are actually saying here, the most interesting part, at least for me, is the AI changes. So right now, ground AI is one of Odyssey's biggest weaknesses, perhaps the single biggest weakness in many different regards. Now, enemies will quite happily stand in the open whilst you shoot them in the face. They're often slow to take cover, slow to react, and they don't really try to flush you out or put pressure on you in the way you might expect from any half-decent shooter. And the fact is, that has been a problem since day one of Odyssey. I made a lot of videos on this at the time, back when the update released, as did many other people. But despite all the years that have passed since Odyssey's launch, Frontier have never really gone back and properly fixed it. So changing it now, before they introduce more on-foot combat aboard megaships, is a big shift in attitude for Frontier. They're essentially talking about enemies making smarter decisions here, taking better decisions when it comes to cover, positioning themselves better, and being more aggressive when you're dug in. That alone, if it works, finally addresses a big problem of shooting the statues, the problem where NPCs either stand still and soak up the damage or run around in ways that just don't make much tactical sense. And then you've got the other half of the problem, which is bullet sponginess. So for the most part, enemies in Odyssey can absorb a lot of damage before they go down. Whether that's bullets or laser fire, I guess it doesn't make too much difference. The point is that time to kill is very drawn out, and that's fine for a certain type of game. But personally, I don't think Odyssey is that type of game. I kind of feel that Odyssey would work much better, and it does work much better when things are faster and more responsive. And we see that from time to time, but mostly it's just not there. So yeah, speeding things up is something that Frontier seem to agree on. They seem to feel that the flow of combat needs to be kicked up a notch. So when you start combining a smarter AI with changes to time to kill, and things such as faster weapon draws and stows, faster projectiles and reworked damage interactions so lasers and kinetics actually hit more effectively into health and shields, then it really feels to me that this is more than just a rebalance and more of a overhaul. Like I say, it feels that really Frontier are not just sitting down and thinking, how do we fix the numbers here? Instead, it looks like what they're asking themselves is, why has Odyssey never really taken off, and why has it never really worked when it comes to the FPS component? And then they've gone after some of the main points here, some of the areas that are perhaps a bit easier to fix. Now, you could go much deeper on this, of course. You could get into weapon handling and cover systems, whether going prone should be an option, all of that sort of thing, and there are plenty of reasonable arguments there. But Frontier almost certainly have limited time and resources to throw at this, so instead of a complete rewrite of the entire FPS system, it looks as though they're trying to change the flow of the system, how quickly combat moves, how dangerous enemies feel, and how satisfying it actually is to get into a fight with your hand weapons, basically your handheld guns. And for me, that really feels like it's a smart place for Frontier to start. But ground combat isn't the only place that Frontier are focusing in on. We do have the upcoming Caspian Explorer. This is the brand new ship that's launching into early access on the 2nd of December. Now, I've been fortunate enough as a part of the Elite Dangerous Partner Program to have access to this already. You can see some footage throughout this video of me using that, and in a future video I might talk about it a little more deeply. But in essence here, what you've got is a ship that has a steeper or faster glide as you're coming out from orbit, or down from orbit rather, and this one is actually a bit of a surprise the first few times you do it. We're used to ships having a relatively gentle glide down towards the planet and then coming to a steady slow just a few kilometers up. But what happens with the Caspian is that it descends down very, very fast indeed, and it almost makes you feel as though the ship is going to hit into the ground, but it doesn't. At the last minute it slows down very rapidly. In short then, what we've got here is a ship that has a very, very rapid descent. And then we've got the neutron boost and white dwarf boosting on the FSD, which in a very simple test here I had without any engineering or without any significant changes, gave us over 100 light years in jump distance, and this could be pushed far further, I'm sure. So essentially what we've got here is a flagship that's designed for deep space exploration. Of course, we know that for the moment these ships are sold for cash in early access. That's a big part of this, but we also know that money is going back into funding the game, and this is a large part, I'm sure, why we're actually seeing all these updates over the recent couple of years. But also with the Caspian Explorer, I think we're starting to see a pattern of what Frontier are doing here. So whilst the Caspian is focusing on exploration, we've seen previous ships such as the Type 11 focus on mining. We've seen the Panther Clipper focus on trading, and in many ways it feels that Frontier are delivering ships focused on specific areas of the game. I also feel that something larger is going on here. Frontier are using these ships as a way to rebalance the game. Not in the sense of changing the game's dynamics itself, but in the sense of changing how you can interact with the game. All of the ships now have far better speciality than all of the ships released originally, all the original 30 or so ships. All of those, of course, did have some speciality, but for the most part, by and large, whilst some of them may have been more manoeuvrable or had better capacity for shields, whilst some of them may have had better jump ranges or greater cargo capacity, none of them truly felt uniquely designed for a specific purpose, and that is something that Frontier have addressed very recently. In a way, of course, this is very much about Frontier making money from the sale of these ships, but we've got to remember that these do become available after a few months for in-game credits. What I think is very clear at this point, after seeing all of these different ships announced and then released, is that Frontier were well aware of the problems with the vanilla ships. Each of them unique in their own way, but none of them really cuttingly unique. Whilst previously you may have flown a Type 9 or Type 10 and felt that you're flying a cargo ship, it's really a very different feel altogether when you're flying the Panther Clipper. This very much is fundamentally a cargo ship first and foremost. And it's a philosophy we can see extended to all the other new ships, whether it's the Mandalay, the Caspian Explorer, or any of the other new ships. In short, what Frontier are doing here is using the ships as a way to not just rebalance the game, but refine how we interact with it, much like what Frontier are doing with the rebalancing in the Odyssey ground-based combat. And then we've got the mystery in the star system, HIP 87621, the new flora there, which we had touched on in the previous video, and you can see some of the footage throughout this video on actually what that actually looks like. And yeah, this has some really nice visuals to it. Of course, over time, the planets in Odyssey are dramatically improved. Just look at how gorgeous all of these environments are. This is really nice stuff. And the fact that we have some, what is almost like thicker atmosphere around these plants, really it helps things as well. Of course, that's not the only time, it's not the only location we've seen this type of effect. We've seen it around the Thargoid sites as well in the past, but nonetheless, this is really interesting, and it does greatly help the direction of the game, and at least in terms of its visuals. But there is more to it than just that. There's hints here in the lore about pharmaceutical and military applications of whatever biotech is being located around these sites. That means Frontier are pulling together a narrative thread here. This one has been in the works for quite a few weeks, or quite a few months at this point, and it's slowly but surely paying off. Of course, the question is, how big is that payoff going to be? Well, a lot of players, myself included, would love to see these plants be some type of a hint towards atmospheric planets. Look at the way we see outgassing from these plants. It would be beautiful, really nice to see these act as some sort of terraformation tool. But I don't think that's really what's going to happen here. I suspect what we're getting instead is some sort of endgame and some sort of conflict hook. A conflict perhaps between the various different powers. And just maybe this will integrate into the upcoming operations update. The ability for us to get inside those mega ships and get into direct combat. Keep in mind the amount of installations and mega ships which have been appearing around the HIP 87621 star system. That is very likely a lead-in to what we can expect to see. The bottom line here is that Frontier is still very much willing to run slow burn in-game mysteries. And whilst this is very different to the days of the Thargoid stories and the Thargoid mysteries, it's still nonetheless a very interesting thing to see, and it's also nice to see players getting involved with this. Ultimately then, what is the takeaway message? Well, we don't necessarily see Frontier working on the introduction of atmospheric planets or ship interiors or anything of that nature. What we are seeing is Frontier expanding the game and very deliberately refining and refocusing on what the game is all about. Whether that's a refocus on the FPS combat, whether that's an introduction on how we interact with the game via the new ships, or whether that's ongoing new stories that eventually lead into new content, well, this is all one big tapestry, and it seems that Frontier do have a larger plan for the game. These aren't standalone, isolated updates we've seen over the past few years. Instead, there's things that map together. They're things that weave and kind of paint a bigger picture. And this is really nice to see indeed. I think it kind of paints a bolder future for the future of the game, and hopefully 2026 is going to be at least as good as 2025. Just maybe, fingers crossed, by maybe February or so of next year, we can expect to see another roadmap for Frontier for another year's worth of content. Let's see how all of that goes. Let me know your thoughts and feelings on all of this in the comment section below. Thanks for watching this video all the way through. Do take care, and I'll catch you next time.